The conference room was silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Across the table, two HR representatives sat stiffly, their faces unreadable masks of professionalism. Between them lay a single sheet of paper, her severance agreement. The pen in her hand trembled slightly as she stared at it, but not from fear. It was anger that coursed through her veins like molten fire. "Sign here," one of them said, sliding the document closer. His voice was calm, almost detached, as if this were just another routine transaction and not the culmination of months of tension, betrayal, and thinly veiled hostility. She looked up sharply, meeting his gaze with eyes so sharp they could cut glass. "And then what?" she asked, her tone laced with biting sarcasm. "You pat me on the back and send me off into oblivion while you all sit here pretending nothing happened?" Her name was Elena. Not Emma, not Sarah, just Elena. A name strong enough to carry the weight of everything she'd endured over the past year working at Nexus Tech, a company once heralded as an industry leader but now teetering precariously on the edge of scandal. She had joined full of hope, eager to contribute to a vision she believed in. But visions fade when greed takes hold, and hers wasn't the only life that had been crushed underfoot by those who claimed to champion innovation. Elena leaned back in her chair, letting the pen dangle loosely between her fingers. Her mind raced, replaying every moment that had led her here, the late nights spent poring over reports, the promises made and broken, the subtle ways her contributions had been dismissed until finally, she became expendable. And now, after all that, they expected her to sign away any chance at justice for a paltry sum? Not today. "I don't think so," she said flatly, pushing the document aside. The movement startled the HR reps. Perhaps they hadn't anticipated resistance. After all, most employees would take the money and leave quietly, grateful for anything in such uncertain times. But Elena wasn't most people. She'd always been different, bold, unyielding, unwilling to settle for less than she deserved. That's why she'd risen quickly within the ranks of Nexus Tech, earning accolades and respect even as whispers of favoritism followed her wherever she went. "What do you mean?" the woman across from her asked, her polished demeanor cracking ever so slightly. There was a flicker of unease in her eyes, though she tried hard to mask it behind practiced indifference. "This is standard procedure. You know how these things work." "Standard procedure?" Elena repeated, her voice rising slightly. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table and fixing both of them with a steely glare. "Let me tell you something about standard procedure. When I first started here, I thought Nexus Tech stood for something. Integrity, innovation, empowerment. But look around you. What have we become? A company willing to trample its own people for profit. Do you really think I'm going to let you sweep everything under the rug without a fight?" The man cleared his throat awkwardly, shifting in his seat. "Look, Elena," he began, his tone softening slightly, "we understand this isn't easy. But signing the agreement is in your best interest. It's cleaner this way." "Cleaner?" she shot back, incredulous. "You call silencing me clean? Letting you erase every trace of my existence here, act like I never mattered, never fought for this place, that's clean to you?" Silence stretched between them again, heavy and suffocating. Outside the window, the city buzzed with life, cars honking, pedestrians rushing to their next destination, but inside the room, time seemed to stand still. Elena knew she was playing a dangerous game. Refusing the deal meant burning bridges, risking retaliation, maybe even blacklisting herself from future opportunities. But deep down, she also knew she couldn't walk away, not yet. Not without making them pay for what they'd done. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice clipped and measured. "If you refuse to sign, there will be consequences. Legal action, potential damages." "Save it," Elena interrupted, standing abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound jarring in the otherwise quiet room. "I've heard enough. Keep your money. I'll find my own way out." With that, she turned and strode toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Behind her, she could hear the muffled voices of the HR reps exchanging worried glances, but she didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt alive, like she was finally taking control of her story instead of letting others dictate its ending. Back at her desk, surrounded by the remnants of her career, a half-empty coffee mug, stacks of unfinished projects, sticky notes scribbled with reminders, Elena allowed herself a moment of reflection. This wasn't how she'd imagined leaving Nexus Tech. In her dreams, she'd envisioned walking out triumphantly, head held high, hailed as a hero for her contributions. Reality, however, was far messier. As she packed her belongings into a cardboard box, memories flooded back, some good, some bad, all bittersweet. She remembered the thrill of landing her dream job, the pride of presenting groundbreaking ideas during team meetings, the camaraderie of late-night brainstorming sessions fueled by pizza and caffeine. But she also remembered the slow erosion of trust, the subtle undermining of her authority, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. Over time, the culture of the company had shifted, becoming toxic and self-serving. And she'd been powerless to stop it, or so they thought. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her out of her reverie. It was a text from her best friend, Mia. How did it go? Elena hesitated before typing a response. How could she possibly summarize everything that had happened in just a few words? Instead, she settled for something vague, not great. But I'm okay. Mia replied instantly, want me to come pick you up? For a moment, Elena considered saying yes. The thought of crawling into bed, drowning her sorrows in ice cream and Netflix, sounded incredibly appealing. But as tempting as it was to retreat into comfort, she knew she couldn't. Not yet. There was still work to be done. No thanks, she muttered aloud, more to herself than anyone else. Then louder, they messed with the wrong person. It wasn't until later that evening, sitting alone in her apartment with a glass of wine and a notebook, that the idea began to take shape. Revenge wasn't something Elena had ever sought before, at least, not consciously. But as she scribbled furiously, jotting down thoughts and plans, she realized it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about exposing the truth, holding Nexus Tech accountable for the harm they'd caused. They wanted her silence? Fine. She'd give them noise. First, she needed leverage. Something big enough to shake the foundation of the company, to force them to reckon with their actions. And then it hit her, the shares. During her tenure, she'd been awarded stock options as part of her compensation package. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, viewing it as a perk rather than a weapon. But now, those shares represented power, the kind of power that could disrupt board meetings, sway investor opinions, and shine a spotlight on the inner workings of Nexus Tech. A slow smile spread across her face as she realized the potential of what she held in her hands. Shares weren't just pieces of paper, they were keys to unlocking doors that Nexus Tech desperately wanted to keep closed. With them, she could demand transparency, push for reforms, and ensure that no one else suffered the same fate she had. But leverage alone wouldn't be enough. To truly make an impact, she needed evidence, hard proof of the policies and practices that had driven her to this point. Policies like the infamous non-compete clause that effectively barred former employees from working in the same industry for years after leaving. Or the discriminatory hiring practices that favored certain candidates over others based solely on connections rather than merit. These were secrets Nexus Tech guarded fiercely, buried deep within legal documents and internal memos. Secrets Elena intended to unearth. Over the next few days, she threw herself into research, combing through old emails, contracts, and company handbooks. Each discovery fueled her resolve, solidifying her plan piece by piece. By the end of the week, she had amassed a dossier thick with incriminating details, enough to blow the lid off Nexus Tech's carefully constructed facade. Yet even as she prepared to strike, doubts crept in. Was she ready for the fallout? Exposing the company would mean putting herself in the crosshairs of powerful executives, lawyers, and PR teams determined to protect their interests at all costs. Could she withstand the pressure? More importantly, did she have the strength to see it through? These questions haunted her, keeping her awake at night as she wrestled with the enormity of what she was about to do. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing remained clear: she couldn't go back. Not to the person she'd been before, blindly loyal and naive. Whatever happened next, she would face it head-on, with courage, determination, and a burning desire for justice. Little did she know, the battle was only beginning. The first step was the hardest, reaching out to someone who could help her amplify her voice. Elena knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed allies, people who understood the stakes and were willing to fight alongside her. After hours of deliberation, she decided to contact Marcus Hale, a journalist known for his investigative pieces on corporate corruption. His articles had exposed scandals at some of the biggest companies in the world, and if anyone could turn her findings into a story that would resonate, it was him. She sent an anonymous email late one night, attaching a small fraction of the documents she'd gathered. The message was brief but direct: "If you want the full story, meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. Bring no one else." Then she included coordinates to a quiet cafe downtown, far enough from Nexus Tech's headquarters to avoid suspicion. The next day, Elena arrived early, choosing a corner seat where she could watch the door without being too conspicuous. Her heart pounded as she waited, clutching a cup of coffee like a lifeline. What if he didn't show? What if he dismissed her as just another disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind? Doubt gnawed at her, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to let fear ruin it. At exactly 3 p.m., a man walked in. He scanned the room quickly before spotting her and approaching the table. It was Marcus, all sharp angles and intense focus, his dark eyes assessing her even before he sat down. "You're not what I expected," he said by way of greeting, sliding into the seat across from her. His voice carried a hint of skepticism, but there was curiosity too. "Neither are you," Elena replied evenly, pushing aside her nerves. "But we don't have time for introductions. Do you want the story or not?" Marcus raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Let's hear it." For the next hour, Elena laid out everything: the toxic workplace culture, the discriminatory policies, the blatant disregard for employee rights. She showed him snippets of emails, internal memos, and financial records that painted a damning picture of Nexus Tech's leadership. By the end of their meeting, Marcus looked thoughtful, his initial skepticism replaced by something closer to admiration. "This is explosive," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "But it's risky. If they find out you're behind this, they'll try to destroy me," Elena finished for him. "I know. But I'm done letting them win. Are you in or not?" He hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'm in." With Marcus on board, Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose. For weeks, they worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle of Nexus Tech's wrongdoing. They met in secret, always in public places where they wouldn't draw attention. Each new revelation brought them closer to the truth, and closer to danger. Elena knew the company wouldn't take kindly to having its dirty laundry aired, but she refused to back down. Every sleepless night, every pang of anxiety, only strengthened her resolve. Meanwhile, she began leveraging her shares strategically. Attending shareholder meetings became her new battleground, where she used her position as a minor stakeholder to ask pointed questions about transparency and accountability. At first, the executives dismissed her as a nuisance, but as word spread about her efforts, others started paying attention. Some shareholders grew uneasy, questioning whether their investments were tied to unethical practices. Others whispered about selling their stakes altogether. Nexus Tech's PR team scrambled to contain the damage, issuing vague statements about prioritizing employee welfare and fostering a positive work environment. But Elena knew better than anyone how hollow those words were. Behind closed doors, the company was panicking, scrambling to figure out who was leaking information and why. One evening, as Elena prepared for yet another round of research, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her stomach tightened as she answered cautiously. "Elena," a familiar voice said on the other end. It was Daniel Cross, Nexus Tech's CEO, a man she hadn't spoken to since her termination. His tone was deceptively calm, almost friendly, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. "We need to talk." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "About what?" "You know exactly what. You've been causing quite a stir lately. I think it's time we came to an understanding." "I already told your HR reps my terms," she shot back. "You should have listened then." There was a pause, and when Daniel spoke again, his tone had shifted, colder, more calculating. "Be careful, Elena. You're playing a dangerous game. One wrong move, and you'll regret it." She clenched her jaw, refusing to let him intimidate her. "Is that supposed to scare me? Because it doesn't. Go ahead, Daniel. Do your worst. See if I care." Before he could respond, she hung up, her hands trembling slightly. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she was up against. Nexus Tech wasn't just any company, it was a behemoth with resources, connections, and influence. Taking them on meant risking everything. But as she stared at the stack of documents on her desk, she reminded herself why she was doing this. Not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been silenced, pushed aside, or betrayed by a system designed to protect the powerful. As the weeks turned into months, Elena's campaign gained momentum. Marcus published the first article under a pseudonym, detailing the systemic issues within Nexus Tech. It went viral almost instantly, sparking outrage among employees, investors, and the general public. Social media lit up with hashtags like #ExposeNexus and #corporate accountability, as former employees came forward with their own stories of mistreatment. But the backlash was swift and brutal. Nexus Tech launched a smear campaign, accusing Elena of fabricating evidence and acting out of spite. Anonymous trolls flooded her social media accounts with hateful messages, threatening her safety and livelihood. Friends warned her to be careful, urging her to step back before things spiraled further out of control. Yet through it all, Elena remained steadfast. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and continued attending shareholder meetings, using every platform available to keep the pressure on. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in Nexus Tech's polished exterior. Investors pulled out, lawsuits piled up, and key executives resigned amid mounting scrutiny. Still, the fight was far from over. Elena knew that exposing the truth was only half the battle. Real change required action, new policies, stronger protections, and a commitment to doing better. And though she was exhausted, though the road ahead seemed impossibly long, she refused to give up. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About proving that no matter how powerful the adversary, the truth has a way of coming to light. And when it did, Elena intended to be standing right there, ready to face whatever came next. As the pressure mounted, Nexus Tech found itself cornered. The once unstoppable tech giant was now under relentless scrutiny from regulators, investors, and the public alike. Whistleblowers within the company began stepping forward, corroborating Elena's claims with damning evidence of their own. Former employees organized protests outside Nexus Tech's headquarters, holding signs that read "Transparency now," and "No more silence." It seemed as though everyone, employees, shareholders, even customers, had finally woken up to the reality of what the company had become. Elena watched it all unfold from her small apartment, where she spent long nights strategizing with Marcus and other allies who had joined her cause. Despite the chaos swirling around her, she felt a sense of calm. For the first time in months, she wasn't fighting alone. A coalition of former employees, journalists, lawyers, and activists had formed, united by a shared goal, holding Nexus Tech accountable. The tipping point came when one of the whistleblowers leaked an internal memo revealing that Nexus Tech had knowingly violated labor laws for years, exploiting loopholes to maximize profits at the expense of its workforce. The revelation sent shockwaves through the industry and prompted government agencies to launch formal investigations. Share prices plummeted, lawsuits piled up, and key members of the executive team, including Daniel Cross, resigned in disgrace. But Elena didn't stop there. With the help of her growing network, she drafted a comprehensive proposal outlining reforms needed to prevent similar abuses in the future. The document called for stricter oversight, transparent hiring practices, and protections for whistleblowers. She presented it during a high-profile shareholder meeting, standing tall as cameras rolled and reporters scribbled notes furiously. "This isn't just about Nexus Tech," she declared, her voice ringing clear across the room. "It's about every worker who has ever been silenced, every dream that has been crushed by greed. We have the power to demand better, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come." Her words struck a chord. Shareholders voted overwhelmingly in favor of implementing the proposed reforms, marking a turning point not just for Nexus Tech, but for corporate accountability as a whole. News outlets hailed Elena as a hero, praising her courage and determination. Social media lit up with messages of gratitude from people whose lives had been touched by her fight. Months later, Elena stood on stage at a conference dedicated to workplace equality and justice. The room was packed with attendees eager to hear her story. As she looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom were cheering enthusiastically, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than she'd ever hoped for, a movement sparked by her refusal to stay silent. "Change is never easy," she began, her voice steady and strong. "It takes courage, resilience, and sometimes, a willingness to risk everything. But I've learned that when we stand together, when we refuse to let fear dictate our actions, we can accomplish extraordinary things." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "To anyone out there feeling powerless, remember this: your voice matters. Your truth matters. And no matter how daunting the odds may seem, you are never truly alone. The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she took it all in, the cheers, the smiles, the sense of unity filling the room. She had started this journey seeking revenge, but somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something far greater, a mission to create lasting change. After the conference, Elena met with Mia and Marcus at a nearby cafe to celebrate. They laughed and reminisced about the wild ride they'd been on, marveling at how far they'd come. "I'm proud of you," Mia said, raising her glass in a toast. "You didn't just take them down, you built something new. Something better." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And you inspired a lot of people along the way, including me." Elena smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "We did it together," she said softly. "None of this would have been possible without all of you." As they clinked glasses, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about the early days of her fight, the sleepless nights, the threats, the moments of doubt, and realized how far she'd come. She had faced down one of the most powerful companies in the world and emerged victorious. But more importantly, she had stayed true to herself, refusing to compromise her values even when the stakes were highest. In the weeks that followed, Elena turned her attention to helping others navigate similar battles. She founded an organization dedicated to supporting workers' rights, providing resources and legal aid to those facing injustice in the workplace. Her work earned her recognition on a global scale, cementing her legacy as a champion for fairness and transparency. And yet, despite all the accolades and achievements, Elena remained grounded. She knew that real change required constant vigilance, that the fight for justice was never truly over. But she also knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up and speak out, the future held endless possibilities. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Elena felt a profound sense of peace. She had fought hard, sacrificed much, and emerged stronger for it. The scars of her battle would always remain, but so too would the knowledge that she had made a difference.